6 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. Try to build something quickly, put it out into production. This has got the entire build test cycles all into it. We put it out to production, give it to end users, and end users use it. What you need to do to make Agile work is things like test-driven development, continuous integration, DevOps, the works. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So kind of baselining what each of these are. I think coming back to Nad's point in terms of figuring out what needs to be built, this is how we think about, from an Agile perspective, we think about what is building iteratively. So maybe there is an idea about, we have an idea about what we need to build, and we say, let's try it out. Someone comes to you and says, I would like to commission a painting of my wife. Fine, sounds good, sounds like a good idea, let's do that. And then my client takes a little pencil drawing and says, how does this look? And he looks and says, yeah, that looks good. Actually, she looks quite flattering sitting down as opposed to standing up. Thanks, that's good. So we have a pencil drawing, which in many ways is a painting of his wife, and it works, right? And then he has a choice. As a customer, he has a choice. Do you want it to be a cheerful painting with like all greens and a green happy spring meadow behind, or do you want to have more pastoral colors? And he has a choice at that point to make the pastoral colors. And he does this. In some places, that could be nice, good modern art. You can put it up in your house, and that's still a viable product. And finally, you come around and you paint the nose, the eyes, the details. So most artisans work in this fashion. They don't start off by saying, oh, you want me to paint your wife? Let me go back and get the nose exactly right. Right down to the shadows, right down to the hatching, making sure it looks perfectly fine. And then I start working on her eyes. We tend to build iteratively even in real life. And that helps us decide what the software looks like. And actually, if you see a lot of painters, if you look at lots of research on Picasso, for instance, you would notice that people have seen that he's done layers of work. In the sense, he's done one painting, and that's not really worked for him, so he's changed and literally painted over it, and done it quite differently. And that's what helps make it a better product. The chance to iterate over things and build it over and over again. So I have a story out here. Actually, this is good for painting, but I have a story from banking software. So we were working with a large Australian, New Zealand bank out of Australia, surprisingly. And they had commissioned a software to build for replacing an existing software in production. They had some software that was not doing great. They wanted to build a new software, so we started building it. It was supposed to take us about 6 months to get the whole thing done. 3 months in, or 4 months in, the CEO changed. The CEO changed, and his remit was to look at the portfolio of all IT software. And he said, you know what, until I figure out what I'm going to do with all the spend, I'm going to stop the spend. So every IT project was put on hold. Or actually they were cancelled outright. Interestingly, because we built it in this iterative fashion, the features that we had built in the first 4 months of the 6 months project, which is fully working, tested features that could go into production, was better than the software in production right now. So even though the project was canned halfway or a little more than halfway through, we could still take it to production and make money. So that's where every other project was cancelled and had 0 returns. By doing it in an iterative fashion, you actually got some value out of it. You could manage to put it in production, you have more value than what we're getting right now. A little bit more of project managery stuff. A few years ago, I was working out in Malvern, Pennsylvania, and we're building this large medical healthcare software. And they had an issue, right? As a company, they built software as a company, and the way they showed it on their books was it was capitalized assets that were being built that could eventually be sold. Now, they were having a hard time because it was taking them a long time to build. And how do you show money investment and depreciate it? You need to show something working so that you can start depreciating the asset. When you actually build it in an agile fashion, you actually have production things in production, you can start showing software as earned value, this value that's already put in production, being used right now. And interesting enough, you can start depreciating on that. As opposed to trying to break it up and saying, I've done my requirements, so I'm going to depreciate X and Y, which kind of gets messy. So that's one nice thing. The other thing is when you do earned value estimation and calculations, with Agile, it's much more easy to quantify as to what was the earned value. I mean, most large defense contracts use this methodology of trying to measure ROI on things. So that with Agile, it actually shows you, here's working software in production, and this was the value earned, and this many X number of users, so it's good for you. So that helps you in that. So with this, I'll slightly, this is the last bit of the project manager stuff I'm going to talk about. I'll slightly move to the next aspect of what more can we do beyond Agile? I mean, is this enough for you to be answering Mark's question? I mean, does he know what to build? If you see my first thing, I do an inception, I figure out what he tells me, and I take 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and I come back and I continue to build what he's asked me to build. But how do I course correct? And does Agile, the way it stands right now, help me do that? Is that enough to help me course correct what I need to do? So we need to actually kind of reach into the lean startup motion for that. That's what people have been doing in startups, where you come up with an idea, you build the idea, you put it out in production, and then you measure it. Sometimes you do A/B testing, sometimes you just wait and see if a feature clicks or not. If it works, great, sustain it. If it doesn't, can it and move on to the next thing. And these are done in extremely short spurts. One of the companies I know, I think it's Flickr, right? That goes into production, or Flickr that goes into production 17 or 20 or 30 times a day. So there's small features in Flickr that keep getting released every day in production. Actually, whenever you do a build, it automatically just figures out what needs to go. Is it consistent with the rest of the build, and it goes out into production. People use it, people like it, it stays. People don't use it, the button's not clicked, the link is not followed, you just stop it, drop it the next time around. For doing that, you need to have a level of maturity. So we have the chasms that we need to cross. So most people trying to adopt Agile try to start over here with like project management techniques like Scrum and such, which lets you do iterative development, which is good. But then it's not, you get a level of productivity, but it's not enough to take it to the next step. Without the engineering aspects of TDD, without the engineering aspects of continuous integration, you're still not going to have the level of confidence you need to go to production that quickly and as often. The next thing you can do is once you do CI and CD, which is basically continuous integration, you know your builds are safe. You need to be able to get to the point and apply DevOps where you can actually take it into production seamlessly without having to wait for 6 months and all the stars to align and 17 people on a call to all align to get this thing into production. Have automated scripts, have DevOps kick in, get the thing into production with the click of a button. Now you have an engine, you have the engineering engine to get things out. But you still haven't answered Mark's question. Is he building the right thing? So that's when you need to put in analytics around it. You need to put in measurements, you need to put in things like Omniture and Google Analytics and tracking eyeballs and stuff like that. So, and sometimes you don't have to go all the way as well to make this happen. I'll give you an example. I was working in Singapore with a company called Property Guru, which was a real estate company. And they came to us and said, we realized more people come to our website via phones than on the website. They don't actually use desktop computers, they use phones to get to us. So we need to have a phone app. What we did was, instead of jumping in and start building the phone app, we got a couple of designers in, spent literally 3 days or 4 days mocking up what we thought the app should look like. We created a simple balsamic thing on HTML. It took us about half a day to do that. Loaded it up and gave it to a bunch of people on the street saying, here, try to use this app and see what works for you. We had mock data. Based on that usage, we could quickly figure out what was working and what wasn't. Once we did that, it took us about 3 or 4 weeks to actually build the app and get it onto production. But when we did get into production, it was extremely successful. Because we were able to iterate quickly on what people are using, how it works, and are people using it. The first 3 tries that we did, actually, it was really interesting. What worked really well for us in Indonesia didn't really work for us in Singapore. The same mock-ups. And that made us realize something, that actually regions actually treat these things differently and they search for houses differently. And that's why we had to change the mock-up for that. So that's about the idea of having to use lean techniques to do it. And finally, we get to continuous delivery, which is once things are in production, you get the feedback, and that feedback goes back to product and says, you know what, this is what you thought was going to work, and this is what's happened. And this is what's working, this is not what's not working.
So we started with the Standish group. So I want to come back to the Standish group. These are really joyless guys, right? They're always on and on about failure, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, etc. That's the theme for today, so I'm going to stay with that. So one of the things that they say is that X percentage of features are never used. What are your guesses of what X is? What percentage of software features are never used?
40%. 20%. 60%. 70%.
Once again, wisdom of the crowds. If you averaged all that, what would you get?
75%.
I'm going to say 50% because there's a 9 in there, there's a 20 in there, etc. So the standards group says that 50% of features are never used. Look, 15 years ago this might have been okay. But now it's not okay because one, I get the sense that I'm wasting money. Wasting money, so therefore my costs have gone up. But more importantly, there is opportunity cost. Using that 50% of the time, I could have done something else that was much more productive and would have put us in a better competitive position. Right? Sometimes it's better to build a small percentage of the feature set really quickly as opposed to building 100% of the feature set over an 18-month period. Actually, it happened to us at ThoughtWorks once. Insurance product. We built 25% of the features in 3 months, whereas the original ask was build 100% of the features in 18 months. But because we thought about it this way, as Sean explained, we were able to get something out in 3 months with 25% of the features. The client was delighted, the user was delighted, but not quite ThoughtWorks. Why? Because the client told us, this is all we need. This is delightful. So we lost out on 75% of the money. But even so, the client got ROI. Right? So it turns out that the 75% actually is not very useful. It's like in Word, right? Who uses 100% of the features of Word? You probably use 10%. Of course, the classic Microsoft argument is that it's a different 10% for everyone. But I think that's bogus. I really think that the universe of Word uses no more than 25% of its features. So that really is what we had to say, and then hopefully we can have a discussion after that. There's one more thing actually I want to cover, which is, see, iterative development and so on is very well, but you can't not have business vision. Sometimes the temptation is to run a marathon as a series of sprints. Right? The marathon is how long? 42 kilometers, isn't it? You can't say I'll sprint 100 meters really fast, rest for a while, run another 100 meters, etc. It doesn't work like that. So life isn't always iterative. So if you're making something really fancy and innovative, then start with a business vision, but then help your business translate that vision into something real. In other words, how to build it using the methods that Sean described. That really is the way to do it, I think. Because budgets are tight, as everyone knows these days, and there isn't a lot of money available to waste.
And the other thing also to be wary of is when you're trying to design your product, it's always great to get feedback from end customers and see what they want and drive it through user-driven experience and feedback. But if they had done that in the early part of the century, people would have come back and said, can you build me a better horse? No one would have thought of building a car. So there is value. If you want an iPhone type product, something different, something new that's not been thought through, there is value in doing something completely disruptive and not necessarily relying on what people want. Because you know what, sometimes there are geniuses in the world who can come with something different.
Is there any insight into the methodology used to build the iPhone itself?
Yeah, I mean, you really should read the article that the New York Times did 2 years ago called the yin and yang of innovation. Everyone understands yin and yang, right? This is this Chinese concept of two opposites make a whole. Two opposites of male female is yin and yang. Right? So in this context, intuition is important, but so is rigor. Right? The other thing that worked for them, I think, is the people who are building the product were the target audience themselves. But frequently, that's not the case for software people. For instance, if you're building an insurance system, you're not the target audience for it. So for a class of consumer products, it is viable to say, build a product to my tastes. Right? And Jobs and I, with people like that, had 30 years or more experience using computers. So to a degree, you could say that they were the most demanding computer users on the planet. You could make the case like that. So they could short circuit some of the intuition process because they just knew it in their bones. But even so, there's a number of ways in which they tested the product. I'll give you one example of it. The first iPhone had one remarkable feature missing. Can anyone guess?
Bluetooth? Bluetooth?
Much more basic than that.
Just text message, photo.
It had photos. I'm not sure about Bluetooth, but the answer I was looking for was copy paste. The first iPhone did not have what? It didn't have copy paste. And you would think it's not that hard to make copy paste. It's not that hard, right? I mean, if you think about all the other features in it, it's not that hard to make at all. But what Apple thought was the success or failure of the product is not contingent upon the availability of copy paste. So they said this doesn't belong in the first iteration. So they put that out. That's what user research told them as well. And then they said what is really important to the product is touchscreen, the integration of music, and visual voicemail, and all the rest of it. So there is the notion of a minimum viable product that's taken currency in the last 2 years or so, right? So do various techniques like the ones that Sean described to get insight into what that minimum viable product should be. The other difference between the iPhone and many of the things that we are building is the iPhone is hardware. Meaning that you have to plan much more in advance than for software, especially SaaS software. What a surprise for you. Software is supposed to be soft. It's supposed to be malleable. Whereas hardware is a lot harder. So the situation for most of us is not, I don't think, identical to the iPhone thing. But I think it's fair to say that we used a good combination of intuition and then a lot of techniques that are iterative, etc. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and you said developers themselves used to test it by having a...
Yeah, but that doesn't always work.
Yeah.
I mean, because often we are not in the target audience for the product. Right? I've built CRM systems where I wasn't in the target audience. It's really hard to use.
So, we have run short of time. Can we just...
Yeah. Any questions people have?
Can everything be built using Agile? Like, is that what you're saying?
In my previous life, I used to work at NASA. So I probably wouldn't build my Mars rover in an agile way. There are some things that need a lot more rigor and a lot more testing and a lot more failback and fault safe. And if one thing camera fails, there are probably 3 other ways you can do it. Actually, when the Mars rover failed, there was a way you can actually reboot the whole thing sitting in Earth. There is tons of things you got to think about on those high complicated things like rockets and such. You probably don't want to do it in an agile way. It's not always incremental and iterative. Sometimes you know exactly what you want to do and get there. And like he said, there are marathons that need to be run sometimes, and it's fine. You got to respect that and run those marathons.
Right. I mean, if requirements are likely to change, then there's a stronger case for Agile. If you don't know what you need to build, there's a stronger case for Agile. And if what you're building is an incremental product, there might be a better case for Agile. See, the path between...
Can you just please wrap it up? The other session is going to start.
Alright.
Alright, I think we're done. If you have any questions, we're outside. So
Sure, so we do not have, sorry ma'am, we do not have time for the question. So
we'll be outside, so if you have any questions, come back.
Sean. You can take the question, those who want to get knowledge on that. You can go to the other hall. Here, Pradeep Balachandran, Program Director of IBM, will be discussing how to achieve business excellence through DevOps. CLM and Eclipse organization in IBM India Software Lab. He has been in IBM Software Division since 1995 and has an overall industry experience of 20 years in software engineering tools development. In 2008, he set up the first Eclipse open source development lab in Bangalore, the first such lab east of Europe. Pradeep has a master's in computer science and engineering. His interests includes software development tools and methodologies like Agile and iterative, application lifecycle management, open source development, compilers, and UML. He's actively involved in IBM's academic initiatives and is a member of the board of studies of a leading autonomous engineering college at Bangalore.
So infrastructure is not just hardware these days. Okay, hardware is there, right? On top of the hardware, there is something called software-defined environment. The CPUs, the scaling up and down of CPUs, what I talked about, that's not the real CPUs, right? That's not the real RAM. It is the software-defined environment, right? It is that software-defined environment which will actually help you in meeting that. The hardware itself will have, as you know, will have its limitations. But hardware itself, there is the elastic hardware, as I call it, right? I mean, you have a frame and you can insert blades with processors, you can insert blades with memory, and you can connect to different rails as well, right? So that is there from an hardware perspective. But from a software perspective, most of these are now done through software-defined environment. So there is another company that IBM acquired about sometime last year called SoftLayer. Right? You can go to SoftLayer, you can ask for a VM, and you get it in minutes. Give you a credit card and get it in minutes. And their guarantee is, if you want a physical machine there, allocated to you a bare metal machine, they will do it in 20 minutes. That's what I'm saying. So there is a lot of innovation happening in that area. So you are absolutely right. Right? The need for that will not change. I mean, it will go on increasing. But unless this is taken care of by the software-defined environment, it becomes hard.
Thanks, Pradeep.
Okay.
A warm round of applause for Pradeep.
Thank you. So you have a good rest of the conference.